Good morning, I am Jane Pauley, and you are listening to Healthy Kidneys After 60. Today, we are not just talking about health, we are talking about the very fabric of our independence as we age. We are joined by a man who has spent his life navigating the intricate pathways of the human brain, CNN's chief medical correspondent and renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, it is an honor to have you here to discuss a topic that keeps many of our listeners awake at night, the terrifying suddenness of a stroke. Doctor,
Thank you, Jane. It is truly a privilege to be here. You know, in my years at the hospital and reporting across the globe, I have seen that knowledge is often the only thing standing between a full recovery and a life forever changed. I am so glad we are having this conversation today because for our seniors, every second truly is a piece of their future.
Sanjay, I want to start in a place that feels very familiar to many of us. Imagine a quiet Tuesday morning. You are sitting in your favorite armchair, perhaps with a cup of tea, and suddenly there is this strange, fleeting numbness in your right hand. Or maybe you try to say something to your spouse, and the words just feel heavy, like they are stuck behind a veil. Many people I talk to, people in their 70s and 80s, tell me they just wait. They think, oh, I must have slept on my arm wrong, or maybe I am just tired. They wait for it to pass. But then, tragically, an hour later, they cannot walk. They cannot get out of that chair. Why is it that something that feels so minor, just a few seconds of tingling or a slight stumble in speech, can escalate so catastrophically into a loss of mobility that lasts a lifetime? What is actually happening in those first 60 seconds of silence, Dr.
Jane, you have touched on the most heart-wrenching part of my job. That quiet Tuesday morning you described is exactly when the clock starts ticking with terrifying speed. When a stroke begins, it is essentially a brain attack. A blood vessel is either blocked or it bursts, and suddenly, a specific part of your brain is being starved of oxygen and vital nutrients. In the medical world, we have a saying that I want every single listener to burn into their memory. Time is brain. It sounds like a catchphrase, but it is a biological reality. In just 60 seconds, the time it takes for you to decide whether or not to call for help, your brain can lose up to 1.9 million neurons. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 2 million nerve cells, each one responsible for a memory, a movement, or a word, simply dying because they cannot breathe. When people tell you they thought it was just a passing thing, they are describing a TIA or a mini stroke, but the brain does not know the difference in those first moments. It is screaming for help. That numbness in the hand isn't just a surface sensation. It is a signal that the command center for your entire right side is under siege. If you wait, if you stay in that armchair thinking it will go away, you are essentially watching your ability to walk or speak slip away 1 million cells at a time. It is a race where the finish line is your quality of life.
It is chilling to think about it that way. Nearly 2 million neurons gone in a single minute. It makes the act of just sitting there and waiting feel like a form of self-inflicted damage, though I know people do it out of a sense of hope or even denial. I have heard so many seniors say they don't want to make a fuss over a little dizziness. They tell themselves, I'll just lie down for a bit and see how I feel when I wake up. But from what you are saying, that is the most dangerous gamble a person can take. In your experience, when you see patients come into the ER, what is the biggest divider between those who walk back out of the hospital and those who end up in a wheelchair? Is it the severity of the stroke itself? Or is it truly that initial reaction, the choice made in the first 3 minutes? Doctor?
It is almost always the reaction, Jane. The tragedy of the modern emergency room is that we have incredible, almost miraculous tools to reverse the damage of a stroke, but those tools have an expiration date. When a patient arrives and tells me, I felt funny 3 hours ago, but I didn't want to bother my daughter, my heart sinks. We are often looking at a window of opportunity that is closing right before our eyes. The hesitation is often more lethal than the clot itself. If you act in those first few minutes, we can often administer treatments that dissolve the blockage and restore blood flow before the damage becomes permanent. But if you wait, the brain tissue transitions from being stressed to being dead. Once it is dead, we cannot bring it back. That is why I tell people, do not be a hero. Do not be polite. If you feel that sudden change, your only job is to realize that your brain is currently losing a battle. Today, we are going to talk about 7 specific actions you must take in the first 3 minutes. These are the steps that preserve your speech, your walk, and your precious memories. We are going to move past the fear and give you a concrete plan of action, because the difference between a minor scare and a life-ending disability is often just the courage to pick up the phone.
Sanjay, I've noticed a heartbreaking pattern among the older generation, especially those who live through tough times and take pride in their independence. There is this deep-seated fear of being a nuisance or causing an unnecessary scene. I hear it all the time. I didn't want to wake the kids, or I didn't want the neighbors to see an ambulance in my driveway for nothing. It's almost as if they would rather risk their lives than risk being embarrassed by a false alarm. How do we speak to that specific person, the one sitting alone right now, feeling something wrong but terrified that calling for help is an admission of weakness or a burden to their family? Doctor.
That is the invisible wall we have to break down, Jane. I think of a gentleman I treated not too long ago named Robert Miller, a 68-year-old living in Phoenix, Arizona. Robert was a retired engineer, a man who fixed things his whole life and never liked asking for help. One morning, he was sitting on his porch with his coffee when his right hand suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. He dropped his spoon. He tried to tell his wife something was wrong, but he stumbled over a simple word. He told me later that his first instinct wasn't fear of death, but fear of the commotion. He didn't want the sirens, the flashing lights, or the worried phone calls to his children in California, so he sat there. He waited 40 minutes because the symptoms seemed to fade slightly, and he convinced himself he was just dehydrated. But that silence was a trap. By the time the second wave hit, it was a massive stroke that paralyzed his entire right side. Robert's story is so common because we equate calling 911 with a loss of dignity, when in fact calling early is the only way to preserve your dignity. A stroke often knocks on the door very quietly before it kicks it down. If you wait until the door is off the hinges, the damage is done. Robert thought he was being considerate by staying quiet, but the irony is that his silence ended up creating the very burden he was trying to avoid for his family.
It is so painful to hear that, especially the part about him sitting there for 40 minutes, trying to convince himself he was fine. It's a psychological battle as much as a physical one. When someone like Robert feels that fleeting weakness, what is actually happening in the brain during that lull? Why does the body sometimes give us a few minutes of false hope before the real storm hits? And why is that specific window the most dangerous time to be polite or stoic, Doctor?
What Robert experienced was likely a warning shot, Jane. In the medical world, we see these transient symptoms as the brain's way of saying the blood flow is critically low but hasn't completely cut off yet. When Robert sat on that porch in Phoenix, his brain was fighting for every drop of oxygen. That 40-minute window was his golden opportunity. If he had called right then, we might have caught the blockage before the tissue actually died. But because he was a man who valued his self-reliance, he interpreted the temporary improvement as a sign that he had won. It's a cruel trick of the biology of a stroke. The symptoms can fluctuate, making you think you are over the hump, but the clot is still there, or the vessel is still narrow, just waiting for the pressure to change. I tell my own parents that the most courageous thing you can do when you feel your face droop or your arm go limp is to admit you are vulnerable. It isn't being a burden, it is being a strategist. If you call the paramedics and it turns out to be nothing, we celebrate. No doctor in any ER in this country will ever be angry at a senior for coming in for a false alarm. We would much rather send you home with a clean bill of health than meet you 3 hours too late when your ability to walk is gone forever. The first thing you must do is stop the internal debate. Don't call your daughter first. Don't call your neighbor to ask what they think. Call 911. Put your body in a safe position, sit down so you don't fall, and let the professionals take over. Robert's life changed because he prioritized being polite over being protected. We have to change that mindset.
There is a very specific kind of American grit, Sanjay, where we believe we can pull ourselves up by our bootstraps even when our bodies are failing. I've heard of people who, upon feeling dizzy or weak, try to stand up and walk it off or do some stretches to prove to themselves they aren't having a stroke. There's this idea that if I can still walk, I'm okay, or if I just take a nap, I'll wake up refreshed. It seems so logical in the moment, but from a neurological perspective, could that desire to be strong actually be the very thing that causes a permanent injury, Doctor?
It is perhaps the most dangerous instinct a person can have during a stroke. When you feel that sudden instability, your brain is already struggling to coordinate your muscles. If you try to stand up to prove you are fine, you are significantly increasing your risk of a catastrophic fall. I have seen so many patients who might have survived the stroke with minimal deficits, but because they tried to walk to the kitchen for a glass of water or tried to drive themselves to the clinic, they fell and suffered a hip fracture or a brain hemorrhage on top of the stroke. That double trauma is often what makes recovery impossible for someone in their 70s or 80s. You have to understand that your blood pressure needs to stay stable and your head needs to be in a position that maximizes blood flow. Pushing yourself is not strength in this scenario, it is recklessness. The absolute priority is safety. If you feel that wave of vertigo or weakness, you must sit down immediately, ideally on the floor or a sturdy chair, and stay there.
That is a hard pill to swallow for someone used to being the pillar of their family. But you mentioned something even more critical, the treatment window. We hear about these miracle drugs and interventions, but they seem to have a very strict timer attached to them. Can you explain why the hospital is so obsessed with the clock and what happens to our options as the minutes tick by, Doctor?
The clock is everything because of a drug called alteplase, or what many people know as the clot buster. For an ischemic stroke, which is the most common kind where a clot blocks an artery, we have a very narrow window, usually about 3 to 4.5 hours from the very first symptom, to administer this medication. If we get it into your system early, it can dissolve the clot and literally restore your ability to speak or move while you are still on the table. It is as close to a miracle as we have in medicine. But every minute you spend lying in bed thinking you'll feel better after a nap is a minute where that window is slamming shut. If you wait 5 hours, I often have to tell the family that the risk of the drug causing a bleed is now higher than the benefit of clearing the clot. We have to say no to the treatment. That is the most heart-wrenching conversation I have to have. It's why we emphasize that you should never, ever try to drive yourself. When you call 911, the paramedics start the care the moment they walk through your door. They can alert the hospital so the CT scanner is open and the stroke team is waiting at the door. If you drive yourself, you might get stuck in traffic, you have to find parking, you have to wait in the triage line. You are burning through your brain's survival time. Being strong means having the wisdom to let the system work for you as fast as possible.
It's those small, almost invisible choices that seem to carry the most weight. I'm thinking about the layout of our homes, the long hallway to the phone, the slippery tiles in the bathroom. We often don't realize that in a moment of crisis, our own homes can become a series of traps. You've seen how a simple attempt to reach for help can end in a secondary disaster. Why is it that, for an older person, the fall itself can sometimes be more devastating than the underlying stroke? Doctor?
You are absolutely right, Jane. The home is where the most tragic complications happen. I remember the case of Linda Carter, a 74-year-old woman from Tampa, Florida. Linda was in her bathroom getting ready for bed when she felt a sudden sharp dizziness and her vision blurred. Her phone was in the kitchen. In her mind, she had one goal: get to that phone. She didn't want to yell for help and wake the neighbors. So she tried to navigate that tiled floor while her balance was failing. She made it about 3 steps before her left leg gave way completely. She fell hard, hitting her hip on the edge of the tub and her head on the floor. When she was finally found the next morning by her daughter, we weren't just dealing with a stroke, we were dealing with a broken hip and a subdural hematoma from the fall. For a 74-year-old, that combination is often a point of no return. The stroke was treatable, but the physical trauma of the fall meant she couldn't start the intensive physical therapy needed to regain her movement. Linda's story haunts me because if she had just lowered herself to the floor right there in the bathroom and shouted for help, or used a wearable alert button if she had one, she likely would have walked again.
That is a terrifying image, Linda alone on that floor for so many hours. It highlights the danger of that go-it-alone mentality. If someone finds themselves in Linda's position, feeling that sudden loss of balance in a precarious place like a bathroom or a staircase, what is the safest physical maneuver they can perform? What should be their first thought before they even try to move toward a phone? Doctor?
The very first thought must be, get low and stay put. If you are standing, sink to your knees or sit down exactly where you are. Gravity is your enemy during a stroke. Linda's mistake was trying to be mobile when her brain was failing to track her position in space. I tell my patients to think of themselves like a pilot in a plane with a failing engine. You don't try to fly to another city. You land the plane immediately on the nearest safe strip. Once you are on the floor, you are safe from falling. You can't fall if you are already down. From there, you use your voice. Shout. Bang on the wall. If you can reach your phone without standing up, perhaps by crawling or reaching, do it. But never, ever try to walk. We have to understand that sitting down isn't giving up. It is a tactical retreat to save your life. For many seniors, there is a stigma about being found on the floor, but I would much rather a neighbor find you sitting on the floor than a coroner find you after a fall. We need to normalize the idea that in a health crisis, the most active thing you can do is stay perfectly still. Linda wanted to be independent, but by trying to walk those few feet to the kitchen, she lost her independence forever. It's a lesson in the high cost of a single hurried decision.
Sanjay, we've talked about the what and the where, but there is a specific piece of information that seems to be the holy grail for you doctors when a patient rolls into the emergency room. It's something so simple, yet in the heat of a crisis, with sirens blaring and hearts racing, it's the one thing people consistently forget. You've told me before that a single glance at a clock can be the difference between a doctor being able to help and having to stand back. Why is that one tiny detail, the exact time, so vital for the decisions you have to make in those first few minutes? Doctor.
It is the single most important question I ask, Jane. When was the last time this person was seen normal? Those words dictate everything that follows. I think about a patient named James Nguyen, an 81-year-old in San Jose, California. James was a man of habit. He was watching the evening news alone when he noticed his mouth felt a bit crooked. He didn't feel pain, just a strange heaviness. He was confused and frightened, but he did something brilliant. He looked at the corner of his television screen and saw the time was 6:42 p.m. He didn't just think it, he said it out loud to himself. It is 6:42. When the paramedics arrived, and later when he got to me, he was able to provide that exact time. Because of James's presence of mind, I knew exactly where he sat in that 3-hour window. I didn't have to guess. I didn't have to worry that the stroke had started 3 hours before he noticed it. That certainty gave me the green light to use the most aggressive and effective treatments. We were able to clear the blockage in his middle cerebral artery because he gave us the gift of time.
It's incredible that James had the clarity to do that. But what happens if a patient like James doesn't know? If they wake up from a nap and realize their arm is numb, or if they've been home alone and can't remember if it started before or after dinner? Does the medical team just have to guess? Or does that lack of information force you to take a more conservative, perhaps less effective, approach to their care? Doctor.
It forces our hands, and often in a way that is tragic for the patient. If we don't know the last known well time, we have to assume the worst case scenario to ensure we don't kill the patient with our own treatments. If I give clot-busting medication to someone whose stroke started 6 hours ago, the brain tissue is already too fragile and I risk causing a massive fatal brain bleed. So if the time is unknown, we often cannot give the drug. We call it a wake-up stroke. And it is one of the most difficult situations in neurology. We are now using advanced imaging like MRI to try and estimate the age of a stroke, but nothing, absolutely nothing, replaces a human being saying it started at 6:42. That is why I tell everyone, if you feel something, look at your watch, look at the stove, look at the TV, write it down on a piece of paper, or even on your arm if you have to. If you are with someone, shout the time to them. It is 10 o'clock, remember 10 o'clock. This one act of recording the time is a lifeline you are throwing to your doctor. James Nguyen is back in San Jose today, talking to his grandkids and enjoying his garden, largely because he looked at that clock. He participated in his own rescue by giving us the one variable we couldn't find on our own.
We've been talking a lot about the internal experience, but for the family members, the friends, or even the person in the grocery store aisle next to you, a stroke can look very different. Sometimes it's subtle, a look in the eyes, a slight change in the rhythm of speech. You've mentioned the FAST acronym before, but I want to dig deeper into what that actually looks like in real life. How does a family go from a normal Sunday dinner to the realization that their world is about to change, and what are the specific red flags that should make them stop everything and call for help? Doctor?
It's that moment where the person you know suddenly becomes a stranger in a very specific way. I often think of a family in San Jose, the relatives of James Nguyen, whom we mentioned, but specifically how his daughter recognized the change. Even though James was alone when it started, when he finally got on the phone, his daughter noticed he sounded heavy. That's the S in fast speech. Is it slurred? Does it sound like they have a mouthful of marbles? The F is for face, ask them to smile. Does one side of the mouth stay down? The A is for arm, ask them to raise both arms. Does one drift downward? And T is time, the signal to call 911 immediately. But here is the part people miss. You don't need all of them. If just the face is drooping, call. If just the speech is off, call. I've seen families wait because, well, he can still walk, so it can't be a stroke. That is a deadly mistake. A stroke doesn't always come with a flourish. Sometimes it's just a quiet slipping away of a single faculty.
And what about the symptoms that seem to go away? I've heard people say, oh, my face felt tight for a few minutes, but then it passed, so I figured I was just stressed. There's a temptation to breathe a sigh of relief and go back to business as usual. Is that recovery a sign that the danger has passed, or is it actually a more urgent warning that something even bigger is lurking just around the corner? Doctor?
That is what we call a TIA, or a transient ischemic attack. And in many ways, it's more urgent than a full-blown stroke because it's a gift of time that most people throw away. Think of it like the smoke you see before a house fire. The smoke isn't the fire, but it tells you the fire is coming. If your symptoms disappear after 10 minutes, you haven't gotten over it. You have just had a temporary restoration of blood flow to a vessel that is still dangerously compromised. Research shows that a significant percentage of people who have a TIA will have a major debilitating stroke within the next few days or weeks. When you ignore that mini stroke, you are ignoring the only warning your body is going to give you. I tell people to treat a TIA with the exact same urgency as a massive stroke. Go to the ER, get the imaging, get on the right preventative medication. We can often prevent the big one if we catch the little one. Never assume that because the symptoms stopped, the underlying cause has vanished. A stroke is a process, not just a single event, and your job is to interrupt that process the very second you see the first sign of trouble.
There is so much folk wisdom out there, Sanjay, especially in tight-knit communities where people rely on traditional remedies. I've heard of people being told to drink sugar water if they feel faint, or to rub ginger on their limbs, or even the classic, just sleep it off and you'll be fine in the morning. There's a comfort in these familiar actions, but in the context of a stroke, I imagine they can be incredibly destructive. Why is the wait-and-see or home remedy approach so particularly dangerous when we are talking about the brain? Doctor?
It's dangerous because it creates a false sense of activity while the brain is literally dying. Every minute you spend mixing sugar water or looking for a heating pad is a minute where 1.9 million neurons are being lost forever. There is no home remedy for a blocked artery in the brain, none. If you give someone something to drink or eat while they are having a stroke, you are also creating a massive risk of aspiration. If their throat muscles are compromised by the stroke, that water or food goes straight into their lungs, causing pneumonia on top of the brain injury. And the sleep it off advice, that is perhaps the most frequent cause of permanent disability I see. People go to bed with a numb arm and wake up unable to speak. By the time they wake up, the treatment window for the clot-busting drugs is gone. We call these wake-up strokes, and they are some of the hardest cases to treat because we don't know when they started.
It sounds like people are trying to find a way to avoid the reality of what's happening. Maybe it's the fear of the cost of an ambulance or the fear of a long hospital stay. But what is the real cost, not just in dollars, but in life, when someone chooses a home remedy over a 911 call? How do you explain the trade-off to someone who is worried about causing a fuss or the expense of emergency care? Doctor?
I tell them that the most expensive thing you can do is wait. The cost of an ambulance and an ER visit is nothing compared to the cost of years of around-the-clock nursing care, home modifications, and the loss of your ability to earn or enjoy your life. But beyond the money, it's about the loss of self. A stroke takes away your voice, your ability to feed yourself, your ability to recognize your own children. No amount of rubbing oil or resting can restore those things once the brain tissue is dead. We have a very specific golden hour in stroke care. The closer you get to that first hour, the higher the chance you walk out of the hospital with zero deficits. Every home remedy is a thief that steals your chance at a full recovery. If you suspect a stroke, the only remedy is a hospital with a stroke center. Period. Don't let your tradition or your frugality rob you of your future. We have the technology to save you, but only if you show up. The bravest thing you can do is ignore the myths and trust the science of time.
We often praise people for being heroes, for pushing through pain, for not complaining, for staying on their feet. But in the world of emergency medicine, and specifically with stroke, it seems that being a hero in the traditional sense is actually a liability. You've mentioned that the first 3 minutes require a different kind of courage. the courage to be still and the courage to be helped. Why is it so important for someone, especially someone like Patricia Johnson, who faced a terrifying moment alone, to abandon the impulse to handle it themselves? Doctor.
Patricia Johnson's story is a perfect example of how panic and the desire to be strong can complicate things. Patricia was 89 years old, living in Cleveland, Ohio. She was in her kitchen when her speech suddenly became garbled, what her neighbor later described as alien language. Patricia realized something was wrong, and her first instinct was to get to her front door to unlock it for help. But she started hyperventilating. She was terrified. She tried to rush. Her breath was shallow and fast, and that panic caused her blood pressure to spike, which can actually worsen certain types of strokes. She was trying to be her own rescuer, but she was accidentally making herself much sicker. In those first 3 minutes, the best thing you can do is not be a hero. Don't try to unlock the door if it means walking across the house. Don't try to tidy up before the paramedics arrive. Don't try to take your own blood pressure. Just breathe. Slow, deep breaths. This isn't about giving up. It's about stabilizing your environment so the real heroes, the medics, can do their job.
That's such a powerful shift in perspective that being still is an active form of self-care. But for someone like Patricia, who is 89 and perhaps worried that if she doesn't open the door, help won't be able to get in, how do you balance that need for access with the need for safety? Why do you tell patients, don't try to be the one who opens the door? Dr.
Because a fall is far more difficult for us to manage than a locked door. Paramedics are trained to gain entry. They would much rather have to break a lock or come through a window than find a patient at the bottom of a staircase with a fractured skull. When Patricia was found, she was lucky. A neighbor had seen her through the window and called 911. But the paramedics found her collapsed right by the door because she had exhausted herself trying to get there. My advice is simple. If you are alone, get to the floor, lean against a wall so you don't slump over, and use your phone. If you have to move, crawl, do not stand. By staying low and staying calm, you are preserving your brain's oxygen. You are keeping your heart rate down. You are essentially putting your body into safe mode so that when the medics arrive, they are treating a stroke, not a stroke plus a trauma. Patricia eventually recovered her speech, but she told me later that the most frightening part wasn't the stroke itself, but the feeling of being out of control. I told her, Patricia, the moment you sat down and stopped trying to do it all yourself, you took the first step toward getting that control back. True strength in a stroke is the strength to wait for the experts.
As we approach the end of this conversation, Sanjay, I want to make sure our listeners have a very clear, very simple roadmap. When the adrenaline is pumping and the mind is clouded by fear, we need a refrigerator list, those few non-negotiable rules that can be followed without thinking. We've covered a lot of ground, from the biological loss of neurons to the psychological barriers of pride. If you could distill all your years in the OR and on the front lines into 3 golden rules for every person over 60, what would they be? And why is there absolutely no room for compromise on these points? Doctor.
If you remember nothing else from today, remember these 3 things. First, fast, face, arm, speech, time. If any one of those things is off, even slightly, even if it goes away, call 911 immediately. Don't call a friend to talk it over. Don't wait for your spouse to come home. The ambulance is your mobile stroke unit. Rule number 2, record the last known well time. This is your greatest gift to your doctor. Whether you write it on a napkin or just repeat it to the dispatcher, we need that time to unlock the most powerful treatments we have. And rule number 3, never ever drive yourself or let a family member drive you. I know it feels faster to jump in the car, but you are losing the critical care that starts in the ambulance, and you are risking a crash if your symptoms worsen behind the wheel. Those 3 rules are the difference between life and a very different kind of existence. They are the protocols that protect your future.
It's that second rule, the time, that really sticks with me. It's so simple, yet it's the key that opens the door to the clotbuster drugs you mentioned. But I also want to touch on that third rule again. Why is the ambulance so much better than a fast car? Is it just about the sirens, or is there something happening in the back of that vehicle that actually starts the healing process before they even see a doctor? Doctor,
It is so much more than a fast ride, Jane. In the back of that ambulance, the paramedics are performing an EKG. They are checking your blood glucose to make sure it isn't just a low sugar episode that looks like a stroke, and they are establishing IV access. Most importantly, they are radioing ahead to the hospital. When a stroke alert is called from the field, the entire hospital shifts. The CT scanner is cleared, The neurologist is paged. The pharmacy is alerted to prepare the medication. If you walk into the front door of the ER on your own, you are just another person in the waiting room until someone notices you. You might sit there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. In stroke time, that's 120 million neurons. By calling 911, you are bypassing the line and going straight to the head of the queue. It is the most efficient way to save your brain. I've seen the difference with my own eyes. Patients who arrive by ambulance are treated significantly faster and have much better outcomes. So please put your pride aside. Don't worry about the cost or the neighbors. If your brain is at stake, the ambulance is the only vehicle that matters.
This conversation has been a revelation, Sanjay. We started by talking about the fear of stroke, but we are ending on a note of empowerment. It seems to me that the real goal of everything we've discussed, the fast signs, the timing, the safety, is actually about something much deeper than just survival. It's about preserving the person. It's about making sure that at 70, 80, or 90, we can still tell our own stories, walk in our own gardens, and hold our grandchildren. As we close, how do you see the connection between those first 3 minutes and the dignity of a life well lived in the years that follow? Doctor?
You hit on the heart of it, Jane. As a neurosurgeon, I can fix a lot of things, but I cannot give someone back their sense of self once it's been lost to a major stroke. The fear people have of being a burden is real, but the way to avoid being a burden is to be incredibly proactive in those first 3 minutes. When you act fast, you aren't just saving your life, you are saving your independence. You are saving your ability to choose what you eat, where you go, and who you talk to. That is what dignity is, the power of self-determination. Every decision we've talked about today, sitting down, looking at the clock, calling 911, is an act of self-love. It's saying, my future is worth more than my temporary embarrassment. I want our listeners to walk away not feeling afraid, but feeling equipped. Share this with your friends at the community center. Talk to your neighbors about it. Let's make it a normal thing to say, hey, if I ever look like I'm struggling, please don't wait. Just call 911. We are all in this together, and by looking out for one another and ourselves, we can make aging a journey of grace rather than a journey of fear.
That is a beautiful sentiment to end on. It has been such a privilege to have you here, Sanjay. Your clarity and your compassion are exactly what we need when facing such a daunting topic. Thank you for your work, both in the operating room and here with us today. Dr.
Thank you, Jane. It's been a pleasure. To everyone listening, remember, you have the power in those first few minutes. Trust your instincts, act with speed, and hold on to your future. I look forward to seeing more of you staying healthy and independent for many years to come. Goodbye for now.
And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us on Healthy Kidneys After 60. We hope this episode has given you the tools to feel more confident and prepared. Your health and your dignity are our priority. If you found this helpful, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our upcoming podcasts, where we continue to explore the most vital health issues for our community. Until next time, stay safe, stay informed, and take care of yourselves. This is Jane Pauley, and we'll see you soon.